Ranger noted that the Society's proceedings normally enjoyed a tradition of decorum and scholarly reserve, but he added that just this once he wouldn't mind if the gloves came off and some blood was spilt. I leave it to our own distinguished chair, Professor Walter Kamba, to set the rules of engagement for this evening. Professor Kamba needs little introduction to many of us here. He studied at the universities of Cape Town and Yale. After his term as Vice-Chancellor of the University of Zimbabwe, he was appointed the founding Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Namibia, where he was Professor of Human Rights. Other positions he's held in the past include the Dean of Law at the University of Dundee in Scotland, Distinguished Professor of Law and Education at the University of Manitoba in Canada, Chairperson of the Council of the UN University, and President of the International Association of Universities. He was legal advisor in the drafting of the Zimbabwe Constitution and Deputy Chair of the Zimbabwe Constitutional Commission. He is currently the Herbert Chitepo UNESCO Professor of Human Rights, Democracy, Peace and Governance at the University of Zimbabwe. We're honoured to have him. It's a wonder that he can spare the time, but we're most delighted that he has done, and I will now ask him to introduce our speakers. Thank you very much indeed, and welcome again.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for that introduction. I feel flattered. But you know, it reminds me of a story told of three guys who were arguing about what it is that you have to do to demonstrate that you are famous. And one of them said, you must be invited at State House for an audience with the president. While you are chatting there, the hotline rings, the president ignores it because he's having a chat with you. And the other said, oh, well, no, you don't know what you have to do. You are at the State House, the hotline rings, the president actually picks up and says, caller, don't disturb me, I'm having a chat with so-and-so. And the third said, no, you guys don't know what you are talking about. You must be at State House, having a chat with the president, the hotline rings, the president picks it up, he listens, and he says, it's for you. When I go through that kind of thing, then I will know I'm famous. Well, the publishers, Irene Staunton and Mary McCartney, our special guests, Fay Chung and Wilfred Manda, and I will simply say distinguished guests. I associate myself with all of the recognitions that have already been made by Mary. We are gathered here this evening to participate in a very pleasant event, which is the launch of Fay Chung's book, Reliving the Second Shimurenga. When you see a good product in print, you never imagine how hazardous the pre-publication process can be. Will the publishers accept the manuscript? Will it be published on time? And we have all sorts of other anxieties. I once read a rejection slip from a Chinese publisher. I didn't read Chinese. And this is what it said. We have read your manuscript with boundless delight. If we were to publish your paper, it would be impossible for us to publish any work of lower standard. And as it is unthinkable that in the next 1,000 years we shall see its equal, we are, to our deepest regret, compelled to return your divine composition and to beg you 1,000 times to overlook our short sight and timidity. And received a rejection. So it has gone through the publisher's test. I'm intrigued by this way of launching a book, a seminar, giving the author the opportunity to say something about her book, then a discussant, and an audience to participate, ask questions and make comments. And the whole process surely must incite curiosity. Here we have a young lady, a young, privileged, Zimbabwean-born Chinese girl who decides to join the struggle, for the liberation of Zimbabwe from colonialism and oppression. I would have thought that alone is enough to instigate curiosity. What gave her the gall? It is inescapable to ask the question, what makes her tick? You must read the book. Fay sees the events of Chimurenga through the lens of Fay. The interpretation of those events is Fay's. This is why it is an autobiography. In the process, we here are seeking to unravel the mysteries behind Fay Chung. But of course, she wants to share those mysteries with us. What is perhaps more important to us and to the generations to come is that we need to understand the liberation page in the history of Zimbabwe. What was the struggle about? Who were the actors? What does liberation struggle really mean? How can we harness that knowledge and experience to better our lives and our country? We could not have been better served tonight by having Fay Chung herself and Wilfred Manda to lead this seminar for the book. You will speak first, quite obviously, but let me say something about Fay. Oh, the other way around. Oh, you, okay. I thought I was being chivalrous and giving preference to ladies. Wilfred Manda was the founding director of the Zimbabwe Liberators Platform, an organization founded by former war fighters in the year 2000 in the wake of the violence and anarchy that gripped the country after the defeat of the government's Constitutional Review Commission proposals. That was in the referendum in 2000. And the organization which she was responsible for was to promote peace, democracy, accountability, and good governance. Wilfred Manda served for nearly 10 years in the Zimbabwe's National Liberation War, rising through the ranks to become a member of the High Command. The High Command of ZANU military wing, ZANLA, in January 1975. Manda holds a master's degree in industrial biotechnology from the Technical University of Berlin in the Federal Republic of Germany, and a master's degree in business leadership from the University of South Africa. He worked in the local manufacturing industry for 12 years in the fields of research and development, technical, production, logistics, quality assurance, and environmental management, and at senior management level. He is involved in technical and environmental consultancy and has set up a company involved in environmentally friendly waste management based on the conversion of sawdust waste into some material that serve as a substitute for both fuel wood and coal. He would be a good advisor for the city of Zimbabwe. It is now my pleasure to invite you, Wilfred Manda, to make your comments.
And the distinguished guests here present, the publishers and others. It is indeed an honor for me to be accorded this opportunity to debate in public about the Zimbabwe liberation struggle for the first time in 25 years. And it is also for me a singular honor to be seated next to the learned professor and engage in a public dynamic with him, given his reputation, and hopefully some of his wit will, through direct osmosis, also inspire me of getting to me, in fact, me. It is also an honor for me also to be here, seated also next to the former minister, Fay Chung. My task today is really to make some comments about the work that was done by the book that has been written by Comrade Fay Chung. Indeed, it is the first work to be written by somebody who was a participant in the liberation struggle, and it is a welcome effort. And hopefully it will inspire a debate about what actually went on during the liberation struggle. This has been more or less like a closed chapter for the past 25 years. And through her effort, she has actually blazed a trail which should guide us into, also, we should inspire others to contribute to the debate about the Zimbabwe liberation struggle. Fay Chung's contribution is also special in the other respect that she was a participant who was not an original Zimbabwean in terms of an ethnic Zimbabwean. It has also enabled me to view what went on in Rhodesia, the oppression that happened in Rhodesia, from the perspective of a non-black, which is also an inspiration to me. But given the constraints of time, I might not dwell at length on the positive aspects of the book, which are many, and which most of us will be able to read when we go through the book. But I will just wish to make some comments on some key sectors in order to enlighten the public, and also make certain comments in the interest of correcting the historical record, in the interest of preserving our heritage, and also for the posterity, so that people get to know what actually transpired. Among the areas that I'm going to touch on, firstly, what she discussed about the Naribaza rebellion, and also the detent and the suppression of the Zipa, which is popularly called the Vashandi movement. And unfortunately, this was really never the official designation of that movement. I would prefer to call it just the Zipa period. Vashandi came about as a popular slogan by the masses of the fighters themselves, but was never endorsed by the leadership as the designation for the movement. And myself, as head of political education, never endorsed that slogan and also never used it in public. It was made actually just to inspire the working people, the peasants, the workers and the peasants. And I'm also going to touch on make some comments on what I consider to be maybe some major factual inaccuracies in the book that needs attention, and also on maybe some of her opinions. Fay Chung is entitled to her own opinions, so am I. Firstly, about the so-called Naribaza rebellion, which was the revolt which occurred in 1974, December 1974. It was really inspired by two commanders who had been demoted to become ordinary fighters. These were Naribaza and Thomas Nari. And they took advantage of their knowledge of some of the excesses of the leadership to inspire a revolt against the leadership. It was really a revolt to seize power. And they actually wanted to take over the leadership of the organization. It was not really ideologically inspired. And it was also very unfortunate in that it coincided with the detente negotiations that were going on in Lusaka at the time. And as a consequence, they also took advantage anyway of the absence of the key leaders, key commanders who were in China participating in a leadership training program. Those were mainly Mayor Urimbo, Rex Nongo himself, Justin Chauke, Patrick Mpunzarima, and myself, among others, who were in China when they started that. They just wanted to take advantage of that. And unfortunately, they also seized quite a number of senior commanders, including our Chief of Operations, Dangana, Joseph Chimurenga, and retired Air Marshal Josiah Tungamire. In the process, they also kidnapped Tongo Gara's wife and kids. I personally was responsible for organizing the force that quelled the rebellion, but I did not participate in that rebellion as alleged in the book. But I did organize after the suppression of the revolt, one of the saddest chapters in the history of the Zimbabwe liberation movement actually happened in that most of those victims were executed in a very cruel manner, and that was the decision of the High Command. And the recommendation was not that those fighters should have been handed to the Mozambican government as put in the book, but they were actually supposed to be disciplined. But I can only explain Tongo Gara's rage that his own wife and toddlers had also been kidnapped by those. That probably would explain the excesses that he engaged in. But then, surprisingly, after that rebellion had been quelled, this was not followed by a witch hunt or widespread suppression of within the movement. In fact, it was followed by an era of liberalization and the promotion of quite a number of talented commanders into senior positions, including myself. I was also promoted into the High Command after this. So it was not like a continuation of the suppression of maybe young radicals. That was never the case. With regard to ZIPA itself, I would say there are a number of misrepresentations and inaccuracies in the book by Comrade Fay, maybe arising from the fact that she herself was never directly involved with ZIPA from 1975 to the beginning of 1977. First among these, I would say maybe after the arrest of the ZANU leadership in Lusaka in March 1975, to the best of my knowledge, there was a cessation of the war effort because ZANU and ZAPU had been proscribed as liberation movements in both Zambia and Tanzania, and also in Mozambique. So they could not have existed. And I first came across the ad hoc committee referred to in the book when I read the book. But as far as I'm concerned, I spent about 5 years in detention, 5 months in detention in Zambia that time. We had no contact with anyone in Lusaka or with the ad hoc committee to help us do anything. So there are also claims that probably the war continued through the efforts of people who were based in Lusaka. But the truth is that the war stopped totally within maybe a week or so of the arrest of the leadership, from what I could tell. And also there are also maybe references to contacts with the commanders in Tanzania, Mugagao. To the best of my knowledge, these contacts never really took place. What eventually transpired as the Mugagao declaration was an original reaction by the commanders at Mugagao themselves without any influence or input from anybody outside themselves, and which was within a time frame of about 2 days. And I'm sure the Honorable His Excellency Comrade Hashim Vita would know that it actually happened within a few days because he was instrumentally, he was the first recipient of that declaration. And then after that, there is reference within the book to the demise of ZIPA occasioned by the fights between Zanla and ZIPRA at Morogoro and Mugagao, where Zanla massacred the ZIPRA fighters. Actually, what actually happened was the first incident. I'm sure if Comrade Vita's memory is still right, he would help me out. The first incident was at Mugagao, it was at Morogoro, and the first deaths were Zanla, exclusively Zanla, there was no Zebra death. So it was just exclusively Zanla. The retaliatory move by Zanla was excessive at Mugagao, when there were more Zebra deaths than that. But the underlying tensions that led to these fights were basically, when we started the war in 1976, the president of ZANU, Joshua Ngomo, was still talking to Ian Smith. And it was very difficult for ZANU fighters to understand how they could be in a union with someone who was dining and wining with the enemy. That was one thing. The second one was, we as the leadership of the Zimbabwe People's Army, that is the combined high command of ZANU and Zebra, made decisions and sought to implement them. But unfortunately, the ZAP leadership still had veto power of our decisions, which influenced our operations and our effectiveness. And what actually happened in terms of those fights were actually symptoms of these underlying tensions. Our solution to these tensions, and also our response to the fights between ZANU and Zebra, were then to sit down and recommend to President Samora Machel that there be unity between ZANU and ZAP, political unity, which would form the basis for military unity. This was actually the birth of the Patriotic Front. That was in April 1976. This was the genesis of that. This was our response to that. And as a result of that, because President Machel accepted our idea, and he also sold to President Nyerenda, that's they accepted it, we then said we needed to have our leaders free. That's why President Mugabe then was released, and also subsequently our leaders in Zambia were also released in response to this agreement with the presidents. So the book also makes reference to our opposition to President Mugabe and the nationalists. That was never the case. What we had were differences over unity with ZAP. Differences should not be elevated to dissent and opposition. No, this was merely difference of opinion. We never, we actually invited them and also facilitated their release. At no time did we say we were opposed to them. And then because of the differences towards Geneva, our main argument with regard to the participation in the Geneva conference was that we needed a single Patriotic Front delegation. We did not want ZANU and ZAPU delegation. We wanted one and we wanted to fall under one delegation, not ZANU. Unfortunately, this was not accepted. Not that we didn't want to go to Geneva. In the end, President Machel compelled us to go under ZANU, which was a compromise that we had to make. But I'm just putting the record straight. Subsequently after that, it was President Mugabe himself as leader of ZANU who then requested the Mozambican government to have the ZIPA leaders arrested. They were not arrested by Tongogara, as may be alleged in the book. No, it was at the request of President Mugabe to President Samora Machel. Tongogara, as the commander, was then requested actually to effect that. And we were never really arrested by Tongogara. That cannot be the case. That's not true. And those who remained in the camps were probably arrested. But this was a decision. Tongogara himself said, I'm sorry, gentlemen. I've been given a tough task by the leadership. That's what he said to all those who were arrested. So the inference that it was Tongogara who arrested, that's not true. It cannot be true. We need to correct that record with regard to that. So in the end, anyway, people were then arrested. And there is also a reference to the fact that there was no resistance to the arrest and so forth. One of the last things that I did was I requested the late Governor Mark Dube and John Chimbandi to make sure that no one resists the takeover of the camps by President Mugabe, because it would have served as a retrospective justification for the preemptive arrest of the commanders. I actually gave them those instructions myself. That's why there was no revolt. Basically, that is what the situation is. Right, so much about ZIPA, and then maybe I'll just run through some of the major factual inaccuracies that I think are also important in the book. Primarily, it is alleged that when Comrade Manika, the late Robson Manika, joined ZANLA, he came over with 200 fighters who actually boosted ZANLA's strength. The truth is, through a period of 5 years, from 1970 to 1974, only 12 former ZIPRA fighters joined ZANLA. Rex Nongo and 7 of his colleagues joined in 1970. 2 others joined, with whom I trained, joined in 1971. Robson Manika joined in December 1971, and then subsequently there was Elliot Seke who joined. So it's not more than 12. So the reference to that having boosted that, and also Robson Manika was never at any moment chief of staff of ZANLA, and also Rex Nongo never at any time commanded the northeastern area. It was, the first commander was Mayor Rimbo, the second one was Joseph Chimrenga, to whom actually Rex Nongo himself reported. It was just a question of maybe highlighting the inaccuracy with regard to that. There are also quite a number of other inaccuracies that I would wish to just maybe to run through. There is also references to the fact that Comrade Chitepo and ZANU external leadership were probably amenable to a settlement during the time with Ian Smith. That was never the case. He was actually vehemently opposed to that. And he was actually dubbed the Black Napoleon for resisting the implementation of that, of that agreement. And also, after the 1974 Lusaka agreement, Stole never remained in Lusaka as alleged in the book. He actually went back to Rhodesia and was arrested, only to be released about 3 months after Chitepo's death. And also after independence in 1980, the former Zipa fighters never really refused to work with ZANU. When negotiations to rejoin ZANU started in January 1980, Zipa commanders and others refused to negotiate that because they felt that as long as they were on Mozambican soil, they were still prisoners. They wanted to negotiate that as free men back in Zimbabwe, in a free Zimbabwe. So the people who actually mediated that were Rex Nongo himself and the late journalist Godwin Matatu. They were instrumental in that. In the end, it was the ZANU-PF Central Committee which actually declined the offer to rejoin. And subsequently, most of the ZANU fighters really, former Zipa fighters, they joined ZAPU anyway. And some of them are still in the army, captains of ZAPU. Not that their efforts to rejoin ZANU were not successful. And maybe there are just a few others to mention. I would want maybe Zimbabweans who are here maybe to correct me if I'm wrong about certain things maybe made in the book about homosexuality being rampant in the urban areas. As far as I'm concerned, they brought me Narara, I didn't know that. And also about the Rhodesians seizing property of all politicians. As far as I know, what they seized were properties of political parties. President Mugabe, when he returned, he still had his house in Highfield. It was never confiscated. Right, the other issue that I really wish to point about Comrade Chung's opinions, very strong opinions about certain individuals, which I think are very unfortunate in the sense that most of those are not in a position to answer them. The depiction of Tongo Garas was still to Chitepo and Mugabe. I wish there had been really corroborative evidence in terms of footnotes and sources, corroborative sources, to substantiate those, because some of the allegations are really quite strong. Ahmad Ziripis was still towards Tongo Gara. Ahmad Ziripi and Rugarugum was attempted out of Chitepo. Joe Tadera's pretensions to ZANU leadership. Patrick Kombaya's attempts to take over the ZANU leadership. And the designation of Masangoma is a possible informer. I think these are rather strong comments, especially for people who are now late and not in a position to comment about them. We would actually need to authentic sources to corroborate some of these claims. And just one word about education. Education within Zanla started maybe much earlier. It started in 1972, after we got recruits from the northeastern area. We needed to raise their literacy level so that they could appreciate and assimilate some of the military expertise. It started as a night school, and eventually we had a school established when we got a number of school people coming to the liberation struggle. Actually, the commander of the chief of defense forces right now, General Chiwenga, General Constant Chiwenga, and also the late retired Somondo served as teaching assistants in that school. And we welcome actually that there was a lot of development afterwards, and also after independence, access to education was improved. But I must say, lamentably, the quality of education started falling after 1985. That is a fact, and it still remains up to now. It's lamentable. We wish to raise that. And then coming to the fruits of independence, just to maybe wind up my presentation, the fruits of independence, I would say, I don't want to go into detail as to what my comrade did here, but the greatest indictment of our independence is the exhibition of withdrawal symptoms from association with the liberation struggle on the part of self-respecting former war veterans. self-respecting, level-headed, and those who really keep to stand. This is actually a heavy indictment on the liberation struggle. The other one is the mass exodus of Zimbabweans in millions, youth and professionals outside the country. In contrast to what happened 25 years earlier, when people would actually, there was an influx to the liberation movement, not in search of comforts or opportunity, but ready to sacrifice their lives to liberate. This is the biggest indictment on our liberation struggle. We don't need anything more. We can talk about this and that. But my challenge to researchers, political scientists, historians, and social scientists would be to study why did ZANU's liberation movement, against all odds, survive the trials and tribulations to emerge victorious against all odds, including hostile African governments. But 25 years later, as a governing party, it has floundered and is actually lost popularity and hence clings onto power through violence and political demagoguery. Why? What is the underlying reason? I would prefer to say to some of those who really did not participate in the liberation struggle that beyond the facade of what people call ethnic conflicts, ideological fights, power struggles, abuse of women, executions, underneath that facade lay the resilient soul of ZANU-PF, which made it survive and win victory. With what it is today, it would not have that. What is that? That is what people should really interrogate. To some extent, actually, I agree with what Fay Chung says in terms of saying we have abandoned some of our values, which is actually liberation values. I would say the key things was that there was a shared commitment and willingness and readiness to sacrifice for the vision of complete political, social, and economic liberation of Zimbabwe. And also there was a clear articulation of the tasks at hand and the concomitant values to sustain that struggle till final victory. These are the things that really matter. I was saying after the Naribazari rebellion, there was no there was no suppression or witch hunting. But after the demise of Zimbabwe, there was actually witch hunt and victimization. And ZANU-PF transformed into a mode of repression, which has persisted today, where difference in opinion is elevated to dissent, opposition, and finally revolt. But it's mere difference of opinion. The culture of tolerance, the debate, the empowerment of the leadership rank and file has disappeared. Now what has now happened after independence is that we have now abandoned all those, and we are now we have now created a personality cult, idealization of the leadership, substitution of the leadership of the leader for the leadership, the party, and the masses. And this is not helped by the prolific sponsorship of psychophonic praise singers and spin doctors in the form of historians, commentators, analysts, propagandists, and authors. We need really to discover what really had driven ZANU-PF. And why are we all of a sudden not, why is ZANU-PF not in a position to proceed? These are the issues that we need to interrogate. Everything else we might talk about, the economy, that's all nothing. We need to go back to the real culture that enables ZANU-PF to emerge victorious later. In conclusion, I would say Comrade Fay's effort was really quite brilliant. It's a welcome effort in terms of stimulating debate. But I would say, this I need to point out to my dear comrade, it would risk being perceived as a sponsored effort on account of, one, not even a single word of criticism, anything negative about the leader of ZANU. Everything is fine about him. That's not true. On the other hand, there is liberal and unrestrained criticism and attack on potential political rivals for the president. That compromises the objectivity of the book. On the other hand, also wish to say, the book in its approach is rather generalized and opinionated and judgmental to such an extent that it could not have derived from personal experience, but maybe from hearsay and conjecture. there is need really to base the book on practical experiences. And also, some of the people who are still alive today who played critical roles in the liberation struggle would have been consulted for comment, and with their comments duly with their comments duly acknowledged. I thank you, Professor.
Thank you. I won't comment on those comments. But obviously, the greatest success of a publication of this character is in fact to stimulate debate. And this is what it's doing. I will now invite Fay Chung. But let me say something about her. Fay Chung grew up in a Chinese family in Rhodesia. And after university studies in the then Salisbury, in the early 1960s, she worked as a school teacher, traveled to England for further studies in Leeds, and went to teach at the University of Zambia School of Education in 1971. She joined ZANU in 1973 and active in the liberation movement for the ensuing years. After Zimbabwe's independence, she held positions in the Ministry of Education, heading Zintec and the Department of Educational Planning and Curriculum Development, and being a Deputy Secretary before becoming Minister. She was also central to the development of the Zimbabwe Foundation for Education with Productions, ZIMFEP. In the late 1990s, she worked for UNICEF in New York and recently retired after 5 years in Addis Ababa as Director of UNESCO's International Institute for Capacity Building in Africa. Faye?
Thank you. Thank you very much. After that very eloquent critique by Zeno, I don't think I really want to reply, other than to apologize if in the book I gave the impression he was part of the Nari group. I don't think I intended that. It may be a misunderstanding. I know that Wilfred was never a part of the Nari group. On the other things where Wilfred had first-hand experience as a commander in Zipa, previously to that, imprisoned by the Zambian government. I don't think I'm in a position to say what he has criticized is correct or not correct. I think what I intended to do in writing this book is really to open up the whole area for other people to contribute. And I look forward really to other freedom fighters actually coming out to say what was really happening. As you can see, Wilfred has quite a serious disagreement with me regarding the role of the late Tongogara. And indeed, I have to say that I was quite an admirer of Tongogara. And when I gave a copy of my book to Mrs. Tongogara, she wept. She wept because it brought so much pain to her. And I think it is important for us to see the reality of what happened in the 1970s and how it shaped what has happened in Zimbabwe after that. So I look forward really to Zeno writing his memoirs and also having similar undertakings from other fellow freedom fighters. I think it is true that many freedom fighters, I think at that time we were over 30,000, have tried to distance themselves from having been guerrillas. I know people who are big business women or businessmen or in all walks of life who really don't want to be known as people who fought in the struggle. And if you go and address them in a way that reveals they were part of the struggle, they get very, very annoyed with you. And we need to address what it was that happened during the struggle and after the struggle that the former freedom fighters are treated in that way. At the same time, I think we are a force that people are frightened of. And I think we need to see why that is so and what good can come out of the fact that we are still very powerful and how we can use that power. I think Zeno has asked a very important question, which is why did ZANU survive against all odds during the liberation struggle and yet floundered after independence? I tried to answer that, and maybe my answers do not come out clearly, but what I was trying to say is that we agreed to retain the colonial bureaucratic system as well as the system of values which underlined the colonial system. And I remember in my early days as a bureaucrat, some of my colleagues boasting that we are as good as Smith. We can do anything that Smith can do. And I think that was a really revealing period that we were trying to preserve what was a creation of colonialism, believing that we were doing the best thing. I remember too, you know, every school wanted to be a white school because everybody saw the white schools as the epitome of perfection. Whether you were a rich black or a poor black, whether you were a rich white or a poor white, everybody thought Prince Edward is the school, and we still think so. So this is a problem of the type of values that we inherited and which we like. And you know, you hear people saying, well, the economy was much better under Smith. Actually, Smith is not so bad, his government is worse and all that sort of thing. We do hear that. And I think it is good for us to address what is being said by people and why they are saying this. The issue of no criticism of Mugabe, no criticism of what has happened. In fact, as you know, my book has a hostile introduction, which is because I apparently don't support MDC and NCA. I think this book was not meant to be a trenchant political analysis of certain movements and personalities. It was meant to be a personal memoir of how I saw things, which may be very different from how others who were in the same liberation struggle saw it. It took me about 23 years to write this book, but I thought I should do it, not for my own self, for my own sake, but because our children are very, very confused. My own daughter has always taken no interest in politics until around 2000, when some killings took place, and then she addressed me. Were you killing people before? And of course I had to answer, you know, because the young are asking us many questions. They are asking us, what was the liberation struggle really about, and how come it has led to what we have today? So I think that in writing this book, I was trying to write something which will enable our children who were born during and after the liberation struggle to understand what was going on. And I'm happy that Zeno chooses to disagree, because I think he may have some very valuable insights which I am not privy to. And I look forward to this opening a debate by many others who participated in the struggle and who may have a different perspective, a different analysis from myself. I don't want to talk too much, but I think we are supposed to have 15 minutes of questions, so perhaps it will be the audience that will say what they really would like to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Fay. The two have laid the basis for this seminar. What is coming out very clearly is the reason for writing this book. We need more debate, we need more discussion. For tonight, the time will be very limited, but at least thoughts have been planted in our minds, thoughts which I hope will carry on from this particular seminar. We have 15, 20 minutes for questions and comments. Please make them short so that we can have as many questions and comments as possible. The floor is now open for contributions.
I want to address my comments to my questions to there are two nodal events in Chimurenga, the Nari Bazaar that you described, Mashandi. In terms of the suppression, brutality, which of the two did you find more brutal?
Thank you. What I suggest is we hear questions, note them, then you can respond at this one. There's only two mics here. I suggest that if you want to make a comment, would you come forward and use the mic? Say who you are.
Thank you, Chairman. I didn't raise my hand, but I think I've been commanded to say something by the Chairman. I was not a participant, active participant in the bush, so I come with a certain disadvantage. But I think from an academic point of view, it's important to remember that transformation or transformations of revolutionary movements from the fighting to the governing aspects takes a very long time. In that sense, Zimbabwe is not unique. This has happened elsewhere. Secondly, the sense of vision that Comrade Manda was talking about, which elevates and encapsulates and camouflages a variety of disagreements, in itself suffers after independence, not only in Zimbabwe. The vision may remain, but the practice differs. And this has happened in East Africa, this has happened in Asia, this has happened in Latin America. You see it unfolding very recently over the last few years in Palestine, etc. The question is, what is peculiar to Zimbabwe? And one of the peculiarities that I suspect is that there was this idea that Smith was defeated by military means. Although there was Lancaster House, which you participated in, nevertheless it's common knowledge that at the Kissinger summit in Pretoria in '76, Smith was told that if he went on for too long, he would actually suffer a military defeat on the battlefield. Now, there is that notion, I suspect, that here, against all odds, Smith was defeated militarily, even though there was the Lancaster House discussion. Now, that gave a sense of a supreme confidence, which I think, unfortunately, including I and others, suffered, and that is we engaged in a kind of exceptionalism. We felt that Zimbabwe was somehow an exceptionalist movement, and so we engaged in a kind of a hubris for which we are paying the price. I remember when the Zambian kwacha went down from 1 to $1 US to 8 kwacha to 1, I myself was telling my relatives in Zambia how foolish they were. Only a few years later, they began to tell me how clever we were, that we were foolish much quicker. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chairman. I won't say who I am or what I am, because the previous speaker hasn't said so. Chairman, I have 2 or 3 quick comments or questions. My first question to Comrade Fay is, what are you going to do in terms of correcting inaccuracies that are running through your book? Cases in point are one, that Nyazonya was bombarded by aircraft. There was never an aircraft there. Second question is about people from Zipra who were coming to join ZANA. For example, then they came in hordes of hundreds, when there were just a few. Those are that I could mention now, but there are so many other inaccuracies there. So my main question is, what are you going to do about them? Because the book should not be allowed to go to press without those corrections having been made. Sorry, to go to the public without correcting those mistakes. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't wish to say much, but what I want to say is that I want to congratulate Fay for taking up the challenge. Because already, suppose it was not for Fay, we wouldn't be knowing the truth behind the scenes. Now, I know history. When it comes to history, there's no one who can be able to say I'm the person who can perfect history. You know, people have their different opinions, and they are allowed to bring out their opinions. And as for Fay, in fact, I'm happy that you have taken the challenge. And for me, I'm happy because when Zino was talking, the 3 guys that are here, what his critiques to some extent is true. I remember the last time I met these guys at a rally, and when they were arrested by Tongo. And Irene Zindi sang a song, "Son, please the nation." Yes, "Son, save the nation." And then little did she know that she was going to be part of that as well. So I remember the day when we parted with these guys. It was a sad story, and I'm not going to go into details. But anyway, I've just come here to congratulate Fay for setting the ball rolling. For those who feel that the facts that have been presented by Fay are wrong, this is a challenge for you to correct the history of the liberation struggle. Congratulations. Always in Zimbabwe,
I was young, I was 16. And now when I look at what is going on now, there's so much confusion, and there's so much tension and so forth, which actually is embedded in the history of the armed struggle. One of the major aggravating features to all this is that the real story about the war has not been presented. And that's the major flaw we have about our society today. In other words, we don't have a link of the present to our past. And there are certain very fundamental issues which would clarify a lot of things which are happening, a lot of things which are going all right, which are going, which are bad, and so forth. But because we don't have that story, well, maybe this is a very good, a very good beginning. But however, the question still remains: is it going to is it really a beginning, or it might be the end? That's one question. And then the other question is, we need, this one is a memia, and of course, you are not really so much bound by facts. You know, it's not scientific research, as it were. But we still need to research about our history. We still need to write about that. Yeah, and the challenge goes to institutions. Well, we have Professor Kamba here, and maybe the rest of other learned people here. How much are we doing about it? What is the University of Zimbabwe doing, for example? How much have we encouraged, at least for that truth to be known? So I really find it very difficult, and
the author in the discussion of this launch, I took courage to stand, first to say who I am. If others have been shy, I don't know why. My name is Hashim Mbita. I had the privilege of working with liberation movements for 21 years, Zimbabwe inclusive. I had opportunity of working for my party in 1970-72 as the Secretary General, and therefore started working with the party's liberation that far back. I'm inspired by this launch and the debate that has ensued. It is very, very encouraging. This was my concern when I spoke to students at the University of Zimbabwe on the Africa Day last year, that there is so much ignorance about what went around the struggle that there is apathy about it. That there are unnecessary questions which are asked and people are shy to give answers to. It's not fair to the new generation. It's not fair for future generations. We who took part in the struggle owe it to them, owe it to eternity, to give out what went around during the struggle. We can't ask for commitment, as was being said here, out of people who don't know. There was that commitment during the struggle because they lived in it. They saw it. They felt the oppression. They felt the urge to get out of oppression. After independence, there was no equal effort of passing over the information about how success came about. And we expected the new ones just to dream and love the struggle for which they are not told about. Certainly, they have new priorities in life. Science and technology has taken place. New developments are coming. They want to be part of that development. And